This is the second video for section 0-3 Precalc. We're on page P10. P11. What we're going to be talking about is solving quadratic functions. So a quadratic equation. A quadratic equation is a polynomial with a second degree. That means that the highest degree on the variable is the second. Something like x squared plus 3x minus 9 equals 0. The highest power we have is 2, so it has a degree of 2, and we call that a quadratic equation. The standard form of the quadratic formula is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 is the standard form, and where a cannot equal 0. So how do we solve for the quadratic equation? Okay, so we can do it in several methods. The first one we're going to be talking about is the solving by factoring. So we're on page P11, example 4, towards the bottom of the page. So we're going to solve x squared minus 8x plus 12 equals 0 by factoring. So what we need to do is simplify this into two binomials that we can set equal to 0 in order to solve for our x values. Value is plural because it's x squared, so we will have 2. Okay, so basically this is the reverse FOIL. The first term of each one in this instance is going to be an x, because you have x squared. So we have open parentheses, x, a few spaces, close parentheses, open parentheses, x, a few spaces, close parentheses. And then we need to ask ourselves, what factors of 12, which is our c term, will add up to give us a middle term of negative 8? So let's talk about what the factors of 12 are. We have 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. So we want our middle term to be a negative 8. And looking at these factor pairs, what pair will we add up to get a negative 8 and a positive 12 when we FOIL it? Well, we have a 2 and a 6. And if we add 2 and a 6, that'll give us 8. So now we have open paren x with a space 2, close parentheses, open parentheses, x, space 6, close parentheses. And in those spaces in between the x and our last terms, we need to figure out what our sign is. And if we want our middle sign to be a negative and we want our c term to be positive, we have to have a minus in each one, because a minus times a minus is a positive. And when we add up our middle terms, we'll still get a negative 8. So now we have open paren x minus 2 close, open x minus 6 close equals 0. Okay, so now we want to solve for our x's. And so we set each one of our binomials equal to 0. X minus 2 equals 0, and x minus 6 equals 0. And solve. X minus 2 equals 0, add that 2 to each side, x equals 2. We have x minus 6 equals 0, add the 6 to the other side, x equals 6. So the two solutions to this equation are 2 and 6. Okay, the next concept is on page P12, and this is completing the square. So we can solve for the quadratic equation completing the square. So what does this mean? What we need to do is basically turn our left side of our equation into a perfect square. Step 1, we need to have it in the ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 format. Okay, so the first step is to then take c and add it to the other side. So if we have the equation x squared This is example 5 on page P12. X squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Our C term in this instance is a 1, so we want to subtract that and move it to the right. So then we have x squared minus 4x equals negative 1. And now we don't have a C term on the left side, but we can fix that. And remember, what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So step 2 is we need to find 1/2 of our B term, which is our coefficient of x, for our B term. So our B term is negative 4. So we need to find 1/2 of that. So that would be negative 2. So in this instance, it's negative 2. Okay, so then we need to take that number and we need to square it. And so that looks like x squared minus 4x. And we had negative 2. We square that and we get a plus 4 equals negative 1 plus 4. And the reason we add 4 to each side is because what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Okay, so now we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals negative 1 plus 4. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 3. Okay, it's still balanced. And so what we can do is then look at it, and that x squared minus 4x plus 4 is a perfect square. So we can rewrite that as factoring open x minus 2 closed open x minus 2 closed equals 3. This x minus 2 times x minus 2 is the same thing as x squared minus 4x plus 4. We can also write this as open paren x minus 2 closed squared equals 3. Okay, so now we only have one x we need to deal with, and it has only the first power. So then what we need to do to get that x by itself, the first thing we need to do is then take the square root of each side. So we take the square root of open x minus 2 closed squared, closed square root, equals the square root of 3. All right, so when we do that on the left, we end up with x minus 2, because our square root and the squared cancel each other out, equals the square root of 3. Or sorry, plus or minus 3, because when you take the square root, it's plus or minus. So now we need to get the x by itself. So then we have x equals 2 plus or minus square root of 3. And our answers, we have two of them. We have 2 plus, so x equals 2 plus the square root of 3, and x equals 2 minus the square root of 3. And when we use a calculator and figure that all out, the approximate answer is about 3.73 and approximately 0.27. The last method we're going to talk about for the quadratic equations is the quadratic formula. So we are on page P12 still, and using the standard formula ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, we can use a quadratic formula to find our solutions. So what is the quadratic formula? We write it as x equals open fraction negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac closed square root over 2a closed fraction. Okay, so where are all of our a, b's, and c's? Well, they come from the standard formula. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So the first thing we need to do is determine our a and b and c. So looking at example 6 on page P12, if we're trying to solve x squared minus 4x plus 15 equals 0 using the quadratic formula, first thing first, we need to figure out what our a term value is, our b term value, and our c term is. So a equals 1, because remember the a, the b, and the c are our coefficients. A equals 1, b equals negative 4, because remember that negative goes with the number, and our c term is 15. So we then plug that into the quadratic formula to come up with our solutions. So then we have x equals, open fraction, the opposite of b is negative 4, so that is 4 plus or minus, open square root, b squared, b again is negative 4, so that's a positive 16, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 15, all over 2 times a, or 2 times 1. Okay, so now let's simplify this. What do we get when you underneath the radical first? So what does that look like? X equals, open fraction, 4 plus or minus, open square root, 16 minus 60, because negative 4 times 1 times 15 is 60. Okay, all of that over 2, close fraction. Okay, so then we simplify it even more, and now we have x equals, open fraction, 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 44 over 2. Okay. Now we need to simplify this negative 44, and we have a negative underneath the radical sign, which means that we're going to have an imaginary number. So first things first, we need to break apart this number underneath of the radical to pull out that negative and any perfect squares we have. So then we have x equals, open fraction, 4 plus or minus square root of negative 4 times 11, because I found that a 4 is a perfect square. Just put that negative on there so we can pull that out as an I, all over 2. Okay, so what does that give us? That gives us x equals 4 plus or minus 2i square root 11 over 2, close fraction. Okay, so now let's simplify this down even more. So x equals, we divide the 2 into each term of our numerator. So 2 goes into 4, 2, so if x equals, open fraction, 2 plus or minus, 2 goes into 2i once, so plus or minus I square root 11 over nothing, because it's not a fraction. We got rid of our denominator. And so that's how we leave our answer. We just split it apart. So we have x equals 2 plus I square root 11, and x equals 2 minus I square root 11. And those are our two answers. We can't simplify it any further.